Je donne la parole à son Excellence Madame Nikki Haley, représentante permanente des États-Unis et membre du cabinet du président Trump.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Secretary General Guterres and other briefers for being here today. I thank France as well for its leadership on the issue and for organizing today's discussion. Violent extremism in the Sahel is a growing problem, and responding to this violence is more dangerous than ever. We applaud the men and women of the armed forces of the G5 Sahel countries. We also salute the region's partners, particularly France, with its long-standing counter-terror operation. And we thank the brave men and women serving in the world's most dangerous peacekeeping mission in Mali. All these forces and missions have lost personnel. Civilians have also been the victims of violence across the region, including the tragic attack in Burkina Faso in August. Many, many families have lost loved ones. Earlier this month, 4 members of our special forces and 5 members of the Nigerian army were killed on the Mali-Niger border while working together as partners to ensure peace in a threatened region. But it is not just violent extremism that plagues the people of the Sahel. Crime is also a growing problem. Historical trade routes across the region provide an opportunity for some of the worst actors in the continent. Criminals who traffic in drugs and human beings seek to profit from the chaos in the Sahel, and they are succeeding to the detriment of human security in West Africa. On this Council's mission to the Sahel region last week, the Security Council witnessed the dedication of government officials from the Group of 5 Sahel, members of civil society, and the UN peacekeeping mission to a brighter future. These men and women are fighting an expanding threat that is mobile, resilient, and has little respect for life. Their dedication is not only admirable, but worthy of this Council's continued attention and support. The United States supports the G5 countries' initiative to develop a joint force and deepen cooperation, which has the potential to improve security and complement the efforts of the peacekeeping mission in Mali. Toward that end, the United States will continue its long-standing bilateral support to the G5 members' security forces. We will also continue to work closely with our partners to help the G5 force be effective and well-coordinated with other counter-terror efforts in the region. The United States is committed to stabilizing the Sahel region. We are proud to announce today that we plan to provide up to $60 million in bilateral assistance, which we will work with our Congress to identify to help stand up the joint force. We understand the force will need ongoing support and are eager for opportunities to work closely with our partners to make this effort a successful one. But we believe that the G5 force must be, first and foremost, owned by the countries of the region themselves. We expect that the G5 countries will take on full regional ownership of the force within a period of 3 to 6 years, with continued U.S. engagement. This is the approach that will be most effective, in the end, in freeing the region from terror. We are inspired by the region's effort and intent, but we have reservations about encumbering a large peacekeeping mission with tasks it would not traditionally perform. The mission in Mali has struggled to reach its full troop authorization. It continues to suffer from a lack of enabling equipment, and it expends most of its resources protecting and resupplying itself. What is more, the mission is coming under increasing attack from violent extremists and shifting operations and locations. For these reasons, the mission struggles to execute its strategic objective, to support the peace process in Mali. Its ability to focus on its core objective could be further compromised by a mandate to support a force with a broad concept of operations and recurring needs. We owe it to the troops, as well as those who have lost their lives, to protect the mission's vital resources from further overstretch and ensure they are devoted to supporting a political solution in Mali. I note that we also have serious and well-known reservations about using UN resources to support non-UN activities. We will each bring different strengths, insights, and resources to bear on addressing insecurity in the Sahel. We look forward to discussions with our Security Council colleagues in the coming days on how best to bring this force to life. We know that security alone will not solve the complex and entrenched challenges in the Sahel, and we applaud the G5 for encompassing aspects of resilience, governance, and infrastructure in addition to security. The mass closure of schools and the loss of safety and opportunity that comes from extremist violence threaten an entire generation. For many, the temptation to join the extremists is strong. We cannot abandon the people of Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and Chad to this fate. A long-term solution must be found. As the G5 Sahel Joint Force continues to evolve and security gains must be consolidated by bringing good governance. In Mali, interim authorities in the country's north need to deliver services to show the local population their presence will deliver concrete improvements for the Malian people. The United States will continue to work closely with regional stakeholders and partners to identify the needs of the force and tailor our support as effectively as possible. We look forward to participating actively at the Donors Conference in Brussels that will help the force move closer to directly addressing and defeating this threat. It is important to remember that the fate of the region is ultimately in the hands of the governments in the Sahel. After several difficult months, the armed groups have reached a long-term ceasefire and expanded dialogue. These are positive signs, but serious differences between the Malian government and the armed groups continue to challenge the peace process. The armed groups and the Malian government must work together to implement the agreement. As with all peacekeeping missions, we must see the government working with MINUSMA toward achievable outcomes and a durable political solution. Real progress here would provide the surest path to more security in the region. In closing, let me reiterate our strong support for the undertaking of the G5 countries. We welcome this regional ownership of security and stabilization in the Sahel. We will continue to stand with the people of the region as they take these important steps towards peace and security. Thank you.
Je remercie Son Excellence Madame Allais de sa déclaration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Corker, Ranking Member Cardin, distinguished members, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I know the Senate's desire to understand the United States legal basis for military action is grounded in your constitutional role related to foreign policy and national security matters. I understand your sense of obligation to the American people well in this regard. In the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF, Congress authorized the President to, quote, to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons. Congress granted the President this statutory authority, quote, in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. The 2001 AUMF provides statutory authority for ongoing U.S. military operations against al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces, including against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. The administration relies on the 2001 AUMF as a domestic legal authority for our own military actions against these entities, as well as the military actions we take in conjunction with our partners in the coalition to defeat ISIS. The 2001 AUMF provides a domestic legal basis for our detention operations at Guantanamo Bay, where the United States currently detains members of al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces. The 2001 AUMF also authorizes the use of necessary and appropriate force to defend U.S., coalition, and partner forces engaged in the campaign to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. In Syria, the efforts of the U.S.-led coalition are aimed at the defeat of ISIS. The United States does not seek to fight the Syrian government or pro-Syrian government forces. However, the United States will not hesitate to use necessary and proportionate force to defend U.S. coalition or partner forces engaged in the campaign against ISIS. The President's authority to use force against ISIS is further reinforced by the authorization for use of military force against Iraq, or in more plain terms, the 2002 AUMF. In addition to authorities granted to the President by statute, the President has the power under Article 2 of the Constitution to use military force in certain circumstances to advance important U.S. national interest, including to defend the United States against terrorist attacks. As an example, President Reagan relied on his authority as Commander-in-Chief in 1986 when he ordered airstrikes against terrorist facilities and military installations in Libya following a terrorist attack by Libya in West Berlin, which killed and wounded both civilians and U.S. military personnel. The United States has the legal authority to prosecute campaigns against the Taliban, al-Qaeda, and associated forces, including ISIS, and is not currently seeking any new or additional congressional authorization for the use of force. The 2001 AUMF remains a cornerstone for ongoing U.S. military operations and continues to provide legal authority relied upon to defeat this threat. However, should Congress decide to write new AUMF legislation, I submit to you several recommendations that the administration would consider necessary to a new AUMF. First, a new AUMF authorities must be in place prior to or simultaneous with the repeal of old ones. Failure to do so could cause operational paralysis and confusion in our military operations. Diplomatically speaking, it could cause our allies in the global coalition to question our commitment to defeating ISIS. And potential repeal of the 2001 AUMF without an immediate and appropriate replacement could raise questions about the domestic legal basis for the United States' full range of military activities against the Taliban, al-Qaeda, and associated forces, including against ISIS, as well as our detention operations at Guantanamo Bay. Second, any new authorization should not be time constrained. Legislation which would arbitrarily terminate the authorization to use force would be inconsistent with a conditions-based approach and could unintentionally embolden our enemies with the goal of outlasting us. Any oversight mechanism in a new AUMF also would have to allow the United States the freedom to quickly move against our enemies without being constrained by a feedback loop. Third, a new AUMF must not be geographically restricted. As is the case under the current AUMF, the administration would need to retain the statutory authority to use military force against an enemy that does not respect or limit itself based on geographic boundaries. As ISIS's fraudulent caliphate in Iraq and Syria has crumbled, it has tried to gain footholds in new locations. As was discussed with the Senate during a closed Defeat ISIS briefing in July, the United States has a limited military presence in the Lake Chad Basin to support partners, including France, in their counterterrorism operations in the region. This information is also being conveyed to you in multiple periodic reports submitted to Congress consistent with the War Power Resolution. The collapse of ISIS's so-called caliphate in Iraq and Syria means it will attempt to burrow into new countries and find new safe havens. Our legal authorities for heading off a transnational threat like ISIS cannot be constrained by geographic boundaries. Otherwise, ISIS may reestablish itself and gain strength in vulnerable spaces. The United States must retain the proper legal authorities to ensure that nothing restricts or delays our ability to respond effectively and rapidly to terrorist threats to the United States. Secretary Mattis and I, along with the rest of the administration, are completely aligned on this issue. We fully recognize the need for transparency with you as we respond to what will be a dynamic regional and global issue. We will continue to regularly update Congress and to make sure you and the American people understand our foreign policy goals, military operations, and national security objectives. I thank the committee for supporting our efforts and look forward to your questions.